Not all thoughts have the same weight in the mind. Some build up over time and become stronger with testing. Others are transient and easily dismissed. Some gain weight because we engage with them and accept them. Others gain weight because we fear and avoid them. The thoughts that we avoid can begin to consume us, but often the power that they hold is revealed as illusory when we finally do confront them. Our fear may have been the real cause of the power of those thoughts. Sometimes, however, those fearful, dark thoughts have a foundation of strength and strike us with weight and impact, threatening the very core of who we are. Retreating from such thoughts and hiding from them is disastrous in the long run, as conceded ground adds to their strength and weakens the positions we hold as true. This is because we are shown within our own mind that we lack the courage of our convictions, because we will not meet the test with our full strength of belief and allow the interaction of psychic charge to play out within us. The Creator is a mind, and we are formed of his thoughts. I've mentioned before that the battle on earth is the first true stand of the light. The angels told me as a child that someone has to be the first. I say this, yet I also describe other universes where the light and dark do battle, and the quest on the Gorgon's world of death. I describe places that surely fought the darkness before the sun. Surely this is a contradiction. The battle on earth is the first true stand of the light, the first real line in the sand, because of the way the battle lines have been drawn. The darkness is deep, terrifyingly deep, and has strength, not only as a result of fear, but because our definition of truth is imperfect, which means that something of that darkness may have a valid point that has yet to be integrated with the truth. The darkness claims to be the real truth. It isn't the real truth. It has many flaws, but I suspect that it has a point. Valuable lessons can be learned from engaging with it. The stand being made on earth is the first true stand of the light, because it is the first time that the light has mustered a response with the conviction to meet the darkness at every level, even at its very deepest. Here we are meeting them blow for blow. We have brought the fullness of our truth to bear against the fullness of their position. Everything that happened before was simply a local response to local circumstances. No one had dared meet the full weight of the darkness in any credible way. The other champions failed for a reason. Here that has changed, and the consequences will be great for both light and dark, whatever the outcome, because the outcome will have tremendous weight. Will the light rout the dark, or will the dark rout the light? The light has found the courage and conviction to test the strength of truth. There's much to be gained from a study of the power of charge within thought. Our character, the way in which we interpret the archetypes of thought, informs our interactions with the world. Each of us has a unique interpretation of the archetypes, and this causes us to encounter psychic charge in the world in our own unique way. There are many commonalities in how we see the world, but also many differences. The commonalities are often broad, whilst the differences tend to be narrower. Our experiences are set within the framework of the human experience. We are drawn to those things from which we can learn, so that we more closely align with the character of God, the truth. The wonderful thing about living in the Spirit, and so allowing the Spirit to guide us, is that we are led in a dance through life and encounter these charges at the perfect time in the perfect way. It isn't always sensible to simply march up to the thing which most draws or repulses you and to engage with it. Sometimes the most direct path isn't a straight line. God himself, even the true Father, is learning about himself through the exploration of finity. We are actually living at a very early stage in this exploration because he hasn't truly begun to explore what he wants to explore. This great search for truth is actually a search for the true and proper way to define the nature of and interactions between finite things. God is still building the foundation. Finite things and their interactions must be properly defined before they can be properly explored. He is defining terms. The true exploration comes after this. The true Father has himself been disgusted by some of what has been revealed within his character. He has been shocked and ashamed of parts of the truth and has shied away from those parts of himself in the past, preferring to condemn them, preferring to find ways to conquer them rather than seeking a way to integrate them. This has ended. He now seeks to integrate every part of himself. I remember some of this struggle. He would complete a creation, and light had conquered darkness, and he would think, finally, I can get started on the real work. But before he could even finish what he was thinking, a small voice in his head would speak up and say, rip. Let me rip. Tear. Let us tear. Part of him wanted to slaughter and destroy. Part of him lusted for violence and conquest. Part of him wasn't fulfilled by these rules. He tried to deny this aspect of himself, the part which feels ecstasy when tearing through enemies, the part that takes because it can, the part that likes to be torn apart, shattered, used, and broken. This small voice within his mind was the voice of contradiction. It was proof that the truth wasn't complete and didn't represent his full nature and desires. He tried to deny it, but the longer he starved these voices, the stronger they became, until he felt a building lust within him, the kind of lust that causes a person to abandon themselves in exploration, the kind of lust that overwhelms resistance and drives submission to desire. He was acting the same way many women act. They build up an image of themselves to the world, an image of respectability, and often even trick themselves into believing it. Yet secretly, they yearn for a strong man to see through the lie and take them, to use them for their pleasure. This is a common form of deception, of denial of self and secret shame. This secret shame can add to the secret pleasure of having the desire met, however. They are very potent experiences, the joys of plunder and the joys of being plundered. Obviously, it's not only women who experience this, and not all women, but it is more common in women because of the truth of feminine nature. Men are also guilty of building false images, but I had to choose a specific example. Eventually, God decided to create a string of universes just for these parts of himself which craved to rip and be ripped. They were delighted. He placed them there and made absolutely sure that they knew where they were and that they were certain that they wanted to be there. Then he shut the door. He left them for a time thinking, this should teach them a lesson. They'll finally get to experience the purity of their desire, and surely they'll see the folly and come to their senses. Maybe when I open that place back up, they will have seen the light and repented from the suffering. Eventually, he opened the door, and the psychic power I felt was like a great spray of blood and gore. The stench of slaughter was everywhere. It was an orgy of blood, a revel of destruction. The true Father looked on in horror. They were bathed in blood, tearing each other limb from limb, orgasmic when tearing, orgasmic when torn, ecstatic in butchery. When they noticed him watching, they cheered with joy because they were fulfilled by the truth as they interpreted it. He was mortified and closed the door after a brief message. When he decided to close down that strain, the inhabitants were sorely disappointed. I felt their hearts drop because they were so happy there. The true father was worried about absorbing these events back into himself, but instead of suffering the events, he found that it didn't cause him suffering at all. He felt a great satisfaction and contentment from the process. He was invigorated. They truly had enjoyed it. It was like he had desired a girl for a great length of time, and finally he'd had her completely. The built-up psychic charge was released, and he could focus again without the distracting lust. The effect was positive because these parts of himself had been honest about their desire. This part of himself was in fact part of the truth. A way needed to be found to integrate all truth so that he could finally get started on the real work. That is what we are attempting now. We are working to assimilate all darkness into the light through acceptance, understanding, and love. At present, the law states that all things are permissible where there is true consent at the level of the soul. This will likely evolve over time during the evolution of our creation, as these archetypes are refined, and perhaps new archetypes are discovered. The end of the darkness is the end of contradiction in the mind of God, and opens the way for the true exploration to come. The darkness can only be ended when a way is found to assimilate the truth within it into the truth of the light. It ends when the truth is complete and perfect. I've seen a world where each of us is free to worship God in the way that most stirs our soul, where this is done without trespass, and the rejected things are rejected no more within the framework of the true law. Temples to God were varied in their worship, and shame was directed at no one who didn't wish for it. They were free to explore those things which drew them, the things with which they felt a psychic charge. That world is a good start, and was a tremendously happy place. The people were fulfilled. They were good to each other and respectful. They cared for each other enough to allow each other to experience freely. They loved each other enough to live without chaining each other, unless freely desired. In my time, I've experienced some very telling encounters with the people who love to rip and be ripped. When I was in the outer darkness, and had come to the conclusion that I must be evil, therefore I should do evil things, I began to experiment with the creation of life. I decided to create evil creatures. My worst creation was a form of hornet. It was a deep black colour, and I gave it a venom which paralyzed the victim, and was so potent that a single sting was sufficient to paralyze prey of almost any size that could conceivably be encountered. I deliberately chose to ensure that the venom only paralyzed, and that the victim could still feel everything and remained conscious. They were carnivorous, and they would consume their prey and bring the whole back to their nest. I gave them a knowledge of anatomy so that they deliberately ate around vital organs, blood supply, and nerves. They even left the diaphragm untouched until the end. The victim was stung, and then helplessly suffered being chewed up and dismantled whilst conscious and aware of the pain. This process wasn't quick. As a child, I saw these hornets burrowing under the fur of their victims and consuming them torturously. They left the fur in place because it held the organs in place and kept the victim alive for longer. Only when everything non-vital had been consumed did the hornets finally sever arteries and consume the rest, giving their victims release at last from the torment. They had the capacity to secrete a substance which sealed breaches in blood vessels, so that the victim didn't bleed out prematurely and the food remained fresh. In this way, they could seal off and consume limbs fully. As part of my penance, I was made to experience this death. I didn't know this at the time, but I was free to simply experience the horror of the death with the animals without suffering the pain. Not knowing this, I activated the pain because it seemed to be the honest thing to do. Words cannot describe such torment. The torment of having your eyeballs chewed out and your genitalia chewed and torn away, of being left with nothing but horror, excruciating pain, and the next helpless breath. I even tried to hold my breath, but the hornets noticed and forced me to breathe. They were able to stimulate nerves. I was so horrified that I searched for a way to help these animals and realized that I could come to them as they were at the beginning of this experience and offer to take their place. Once they had realized that they were going to die, they would accept. My soul would swap with theirs, and I'd experience the dismemberment in their place. There were a great many victims to protect, but fortunately the hornets had been put on a cold world and didn't survive their first winter. They went extinct on that world. I was trying to save them all, but the task was enormous. I felt a duty to do it, but it was despairing work. That's when I found that somehow other people had learned about these experiences. I would approach an animal, and the soul would refuse to leave, and I'd find that the soul was advanced beyond that of an animal. They'd chastise me for keeping this secret, for keeping it to myself. They were thrill seekers and had come because they loved being devoured. They kept me from doing all of the work, but they protected the animals from suffering against their will. It was a mind-blowing experience to find that there were people who actively sought out and enjoyed such torment. Why shouldn't they be able to experience such things if they choose to do so freely? I was glad for both the correction of my cruel works and to learn of the varied needs of others. I remember myself the joy of crushing my enemies, the thrill of their helpless fear. In my time, I've been a tyrant of terrible potency. Everyone fell before me. I've torn souls from their bodies and inserted my agents in their place. I've shattered fleets of spacefaring battleships with my mind. I've overseen the ritual rape and murder of an angel. We made a show of it. It was the way things were done in the pit. Don't think for a moment that the darkness isn't in you. It is in everyone, because it is also in God. The solution is to find a healthy way to express the darkness by integrating the part of it which is truth with the truth of the light, such that there is only light. Much of the darkness is a consequence of ignorance, lies, and misunderstanding, but some of it is truth. The false things will be corrected and brought to the truth, but the true things will be integrated into a greater, purer truth. Many people on earth and elsewhere come to the conclusion that they must be evil because they enjoy and are drawn to those things which are widely considered corrupt. These people see the true evil and tolerate it because they assume that it is aligned with them. But the truth is that exploring our needs where there is true consent at the level of the soul is never wrong, no matter how corrupt the activity may appear to others. The truly evil are ignoring true consent and are doing terrible harm for which they will be called to account. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that there is always a path back home for the truly repentant. Such is God's love. I'm thankful for the power of Christ's precedent of the conquest of death, the Lord's great work of love. May it finally, at long last, be fully accomplished. Yet thy will be done, Lord. Thy will be done. All the best.